but a familiar voice lingers in my head. I lay in a daze like a dream in my father's arms, while my mother looked on with a bright smile. In order to make me happy, she ran out against my father's advice. But the next moment I looked at the scene in front of me with surprise on my face, because my mother, who had run outside, was now dancing around with glee. I asked my father as I ran, "What is she doing?" But my father behind me replied, "Mother is doing it for Jufu." But then I looked up at my mother and said, "That's amazing. So can you play with Jufu until the end of time?" After hearing this, my mother started playing with me without even thinking about it. While we were having fun as a family, a voice suddenly came out from the side. "Jufu's mother, we need to talk to you." Not knowing whether I was friend or foe, I thought to myself, "You bad people who bully mothers. If you bully your mother, I will never forgive you." But what I didn't expect was that they actually said they wanted to play with us. "So from now on, shall we play hide and seek or cops and robbers?" At this moment, a familiar voice suddenly rang out from the side, and then we saw Sheila coldly say, "How to play is up to Jufu." When facing her, I suddenly froze in place, not knowing what to do. Looking at the crowd in front of me, I thought to myself, their behavior is all very abnormal. Everyone is kind, so I can't help but like it. Just then, my mother on the sidelines suddenly wrote on my hand and asked me, "Game King, what do you want to play?" And both my mother and the crowd threw inquiring smiles at me. The people around me kept urging me to choose. I pretended to cough, "Jufu, the king of games. Since you all believe in me so much, let's use rock paper scissors to decide." Before I say anything, everyone goes to get ready. The person who plays the role of catching is Sister Sheila, who plays very well with me. At this time, she wants to catch Rongjuan, the weakest person in front of her. And our family of 3 quickly ran towards the front. Some of us are having a good time, but some of us are exhausted. Those who are afraid run as fast as they can. Sheila is still chasing after Rongjuan. Now the villagers not only don't hate their mother, they love her. I feel like the happiest person in the world. I suddenly looked back at this moment. My parents waved and shouted at me, "Jufu, what are you doing? We're going to play hide and seek." Upon hearing that, I ran towards them without even thinking about it. Little did I know that there was an eye in the sky watching me below. The unknowing crowd is still playing hide and seek, and the cod bear size, and she is good at hide and seek. She said modestly, "It's just because Uncle is big that it's easier to find him." Zombie Queen, who is hiding in the dark, is happy that she has escaped from the danger. Just as she turns her head and prepares to call her daughter at her side. But then she saw that something was wrong with me, and I realized that my fingers, which had been poisoned by the corpse, had been restored to their original state. I couldn't believe it, but I pinched it with my other hand. My mother's eyes glowed with gold as she watched me, but in reality, this happy scene changed drastically with a downpour. At this point, the villagers each held a weapon in their hands and shouted, "Brother Shion, you know I can't do anything about it, so accept the reality now." And in front of them was the bear with a weapon in both hands. "Wait a little longer, folks, we're not sure yet. If there's a healing potion, things will work out." The 3 of them gritted their teeth and shouted, "The cure will only work if she's still human. Please look at her clearly, she's not your daughter anymore." The people on Zombie Queen's side are in complete disbelief. Hachunpei's father and daughter were in a cold sweat at this point. Sheila, on the other side of the room, was gritting her teeth in anger. But the old man in the shadow smiles with satisfaction. The monster inside him thought to himself, "Finally, I've waited for this day, and now it's time for my role to end." Zombie Queen was on her knees in a cold sweat as she watched the scene in front of her. Because the daughter in front of her is having horrible tentacles growing out of her back. She even threatens her own mother. "Your personality is better than you think. So now let's get started." Zombie Queen was shocked to see her daughter in front of her. For a moment, she felt as if she had lost everything, thinking of the time when she and her daughter used to be happy and joyful. At that time, she thought of herself as the only one she could rely on. She shares 3 meals a day with her mother every day. Whenever she's wronged, she thinks of her mother. Then they hugged each other tightly and were very happy. The moments with my daughter came back to me like a movie. But now her body is occupied by monsters. The voice of the other side pulls Zombie Queen out of the abyss. "Were you accidentally distracted while chatting?" Then the one-armed king looked at the Zombie Queen coldly and said, "I don't like to say the same thing twice. Please listen to me." Zombie Queen was sweating profusely and looked puzzled. But the other guy raised his index finger and smiled evilly. "I'll make you an offer. As long as you sacrifice alone, it will be fine. If you accept my proposal, I will return your daughter to you." Zombie Queen choked up when she heard this. Bear, who had been in the middle of the confrontation, looked toward her in confusion. But the one-armed king added, I will take back the doppelganger planted in the villagers, and I will leave this village as well. Then he laughed sinisterly. How about it? What's your answer? But before the kneeling zombie queen could answer, the bear behind her suddenly yelled out, I won't give up on my daughter or my wife. Don't you dare touch my wife or my daughter. The one-armed king was speechless when he heard his opponent's bluster. And Zombie Queen is still frozen in place on her knees. Seeing his opponent ignoring him, the bear gritted his teeth and said, I'm going to cut you into pieces. At this time, the old man in the dark suddenly issued a voice, Very well, I will kill you. So you're going to regret this. Hearing his subordinate speak like this from the side, the one-armed king was speechless to the extreme. Then he moved the mutated finger. In a moment, 1,000 thoughts converged. In the next second, all the viruses in the villagers' bodies were activated. Anyone with the toxin is out of control. Even Ingshi can't avoid it. Her pupils become dull and pale. Cubby's jaw dropped in shock at the sight. Before he can react, the controlled villagers pounce on him. Even the mighty bear can't break free. And the villagers who jumped on him kept apologizing that they couldn't control their bodies. And just when he's at his wit's end, his expression turns hideous. A voice suddenly came from behind him. Let go of me, you maniacs. Ha Chunpei is being held down by some villagers. Sheila and the doctor are also being held down. Even worse is Rongjuan, who is being choked with both hands by her own daughter. Ingshi cries out in fear of strangling her mother to death. Who will stop it to help us? At this point, the one-armed king pointed his finger at her and said coldly, This is what happens when you get involved, and I'm not interested in you guys. Little doctor, do you think I don't know that you guys have antibodies in you? The bear, however, froze in his tracks at the scene before him. Because at this time, the zombie queen has stood up to confront the one-armed king in front of her. Then she took a step towards her opponent. Bear yells, What are you doing? You can't go near that guy with your head on straight. It's a trap for that monster. But by now they were already facing each other. Zombie Queen said to him coldly, It's all because of me. It's just because I've been too comfortable recently that I finally caused all this. It's all because of my negligence. The one-armed king in front of me was grinning from ear to ear. In the next moment, the sharp tentacles behind him are attacking the zombie queen. In an instant, her arms, legs, and limbs are pierced through. The bear, who had seen it all, fell to the ground and wailed. The one-armed king, who had succeeded in his plan, wore an expression of triumph. It's a wise choice. I'll keep my promise. But every time I see you, I find this relationship really depressing. Do you guys realize that the nature of your intimacy is wrong? The way you care for each other at the expense of yourself because you are family, that kind of relationship is just a curse of shackle obsession. Then he opened his hands and laughed. That's why family members should put their parents first, and because I am the center, there will be no deviation when I rule over all of us. To give fair compensation in the name of love, this is the true name of the family. He says it's not good parenting to give everything for your child. So you're disqualified from being a parent. Before the words left his mouth, the light from the one-armed king's eyes suddenly and quickly dissipated. Upon closer inspection, he realizes that his arm has been lanced by Zombie Queen with a syringe of antidote. He doesn't know what he's being injected with, but in the next moment, the toxin is rapidly building up in his arm. The power of the antidote was too much for him to imagine, and before he disappeared he asked the zombie queen in front of him, when was this prepared? The antidote is now fully injected into my body. Then she said to the one-armed king, This is the medicine from the hospital. It turns out that before the couple went to bed, Bear said to Zombie Queen, Everyone there has been injected, but no side effects yet. If anything happens to Jufu, you take this with you, and I'll carry a few more on me just in case. Then he said to his wife, You know what I mean, don't you? Jufu is here, so let's get cleaned up and go to bed. We have to play with our daughter tomorrow. Then with a big gasp, he explained to the one-armed king, You said I'm disqualified from being a parent, and yes, I don't think I'm a good mother. For her, I feel sorry for being an ordinary mother. I can't do too much for her. I always feel that I am a useless mother, but you say parents are the center. Immediately after that she put her hand on my shoulder, Your parenting is none of my business. I think it's hard enough for real parents to survive in this damn world and horrible monsters. Said tears have been wet and his face became red, then said while shedding tears, Only wish my daughter happiness. This is the love of parents. But the one-armed king who heard this grunted in exasperation. He then quickly pulled out the tentacles that were attached to Zombie Queen's limbs. He then immediately moves back to distance himself from her. The force was so strong that it took half a day for the feet to stop rubbing against the ground. Before he had time to rest, his eyes immediately stared straight ahead. The Zombie Queen is slowly recovering from her injuries and is walking towards him. She thought to herself, it pays to widen the distance. Her hands couldn't help but clench into fists. Hang in there, Jufu, I'm going to save you. At that moment, a strong male voice suddenly came back from behind him. One punch isn't enough? I'm going to have to do this my way. I've been too short-sighted. I'll let you enjoy yourself this time. The bear walking towards them with a sharp knife and a hammer in his hand. The one-armed king snorted in disbelief at the sight of his aggressive visitors. And Bear rushes to his wife to ask if she's okay. Zombie Queen rushes to her husband with a look that says, it's okay. What's going to happen after that? Bear comprehended and laughed. What's to worry about? Is there anyone worse than a monster? Meanwhile, on the other side, Angshi's neck is suddenly struck by something. Only then did Rongjuan narrowly escape the fate of being strangled to death by his daughter. It turns out that the doctor saved her in the nick of time, and then he inquired, are you okay? Almost had an accident. I should have used the healing drugs if I had known this was going to happen. Rongjuan rushes to ask him, is there any left? The doctor rushed to say that I have it in my pocket, but it's urgent that we go to the hospital together. At this time, Sheila on the side was asking the old man, Mr. G, I know what the others were manipulated for. But the other man just grinned at her when he heard it. And then he picks the skin off his forehead. And then also laughs at Sheila, what do you think it is? At this moment, the one-armed king on the other side was looking at his palm with a grave expression and thought, is this the effect of the healing drug? I can't concentrate because of the headache. My body's movements are also a bit clumsy, but that's nothing. I'll recover after a while, so it's okay. But the Zombie Queen and the little bear rushed towards him angrily. Seeing this, the one-armed king gritted his teeth and looked at the two of them, as my consciousness was slowly waking up, and my mind suddenly remembered a scene from the past. The monster entered my mouth while I was sleeping, and then my body got all weird. But as soon as I opened my eyes, I realized this was Jufu's favorite place. Hands are purple. Everyone's here. At this point, I just want the monster out of my body. At that moment, my loved ones who were with me suddenly appeared in my mind. Whoever they are, they want to play hide and seek with me. Even my parents asked me if I wanted to go in and play throw the rock. But I yelled, I'm hungry, let's play after dinner. How about playing again before dinner? I want to go home now, but I don't know which way to go. However, the father in his head laughed. So you want to go home? If you want to go back, there is no way to do it. Then he laughed, you will be unfortunate if you leave this place. I tilted my head towards him in confusion after hearing that. But my father said, even if you go back, there are still a lot of people who hate you. I yelled at him, so what? But Sheila suddenly said, here are all the family members who worked hard to take care of you. I froze and didn't know what to say. But then my mother laughed and said, you're scared, aren't you? Because you have a lot of problems that will be a burden to your mother. After hearing what she said, I felt very guilty all of a sudden. And Mom was still going on and on, I'm going to tell you more. But I couldn't listen to them anymore, so I clenched my fists and shouted, I don't know what you're talking about. She shouted, my family loves me very much, so I have to go back towards all of them. And yet the mother grunted, I'll make you come home. And then suddenly, oozing tentacles sprouted from her neck. The next second she turned into a one-armed king, and then say to me, but you will regret your choice soon. And then I saw a hand on the side of my head. Then the sound of intermittent chanting reached my ears. I couldn't help myself. I yelled, shut up. I immediately opened my eyes, but what I saw in front of me instantly petrified me in place. Because my mother was kneeling in front of me, bruised and battered, soothing me. And the tentacles on my back are still talking. I've told you before, you're gonna regret this. This is reality. I stopped crying when I heard that. The thought crossed my mind, my mother is hurt. I really don't want to see this happen. I don't like the monster inside me. But the one-armed king in the back is still talking disdainfully. Now my mind is finally clearer. I should thank you all. The child is completely unconscious. I'm getting a little hungry, and then a million tentacles slowly extend from my sleeves. And in an instant, they took over my weak body. Followed by a lick of the tongue, as if the food was right in front of me. On the other hand, Jack had already torn the old man's skin off of him, and then Sheila and him started fighting fiercely. Just as the former was confused by the scene before him, the next moment she realized that she had been cut on her shoulder. But Jack suddenly feels a chill toward his back. Luckily, he was able to dodge Ha Chunpei's attack with his agility. He then turned his head to his opponent and snorted in mockery. Ha Chunpei, realizing that Jack was mocking him, was instantly enraged. He immediately swung his weapon and attacked his opponent. Ha Chunpei, who saw the scene, thought to himself, how did the infection spread so quickly? Have everyone here turned into monsters? Is it because of the healing drugs? Why is my body sore? Suddenly he looks over and sees his daughter pointing a gun at Jack. Yujin pulls the trigger as soon as he sees his father duck. But the opponent managed to dodge the bullets with ease. He dodged behind the wall. Yujin, who was holding his gun in front of him, gritted his teeth when he saw that his opponent was unharmed. Jack, hiding behind a wall, says, "This guy or that guy, they're all disgusting idiots." A voice comes from the shadows. Yujin immediately raises his gun and asks who's there. Jack in the dark says, "That's Grandma Yushuan over there who talks too much. Because she likes to chat every day, I had no choice but to kill her. She was always whining, so she was an eyesore." Next up was Gaotwan the nosy one. He also said he'd help me with anything I did. I've been cooperating with them for the past 2 months. I'm under a lot of pressure. At least don't let your neighbor get hurt. Why are you so inconsiderate? The doctor saw this and shouted, "What are you talking about? You crazy bastard." Unexpectedly, Jack didn't pay any attention to him or said to himself, "Right, but there are also funny people." Sheila looked at him with a puzzled look on her face. He said, "That's when I gave her the candy. The kid's favorite candy. Luckily it worked, so I said it was a secret between me and her. That way she would tell me that Jufu would keep his word. You don't have to worry too much. We're friends now." After saying that, Jack suddenly let out an ominous laugh. Ha Chunpei on the side of the room yells in anger at the sight, "Damn you! So it's you. I've been wondering who it is. I thought there was another man besides your father. So there's someone else here besides you?" But the other guy laughed and said, "You can find out for yourselves." Sheila said coldly, "I'll do whatever you want." Jack looked at her incredulously. But Sheila laughs, "Didn't you hear me? I'll take care of it myself." Then she let out a piercing laugh and was ready to kill him, this madman. Jack, who couldn't understand, was still looking at the other side in confusion while the next moment he realized that blood had spurted out of his neck. He tries to say something, but Sheila chases him down. Ha Chunpei and his daughter are surprised to see Sheila kill her opponent instantly. Unexpectedly, Jack, who had been stabbed in the neck, was still alive. That's a big one. Then he quickly attacked Sheila, and before he could even touch his opponent, he was already hit in the face. In the blink of an eye, Jack's face was shattered like glass. Incredulous, he thinks to himself, how is she so strong? The part that was hit felt like it had been hit with a rock. But before he could catch his breath, Sheila's palm was already on his head, exasperated. "Say what you have to say, and I'll listen." And then sandbag punches rain down on his face. And even then Jack refuses to say where his father is. At this point, the unconscious villager on the ground suddenly reacts. And then his eyes explode and his face turns blue. In the next moment, his body starts to twitch rapidly and he screams in pain. Within moments, a sharp tentacle sprouted from his mouth. Sheila, who was beating up Jack, hears a noise and looks around in confusion. The villagers on the ground have tentacles coming out of their mouths. Yujin, who was watching this scene, asks his father, "Why are there tentacles coming out of everyone's mouths?" The doctor said with horror on his face, "If it had been a little later, we would have ended up like this." Rongjuan beside him said in surprise, "Those tentacles actually stretched out from everyone's mouths." At this point Sheila stops caring about the half-dead Jack and rushes to look in the direction of the tentacles' movement. Instead, she sees a sight that shocks her. Only to see the monster's tentacles wrapped around me like a house, and in front of me, Zombie Queen is kneeling on the ground with her hands tied. The bear are trying desperately to get up there and rescue the mother and daughter. But being restrained, he can only scream on the spot, "Jufu, please wake up." But at this point, I was already under control, my eyes closed tightly, and I had no consciousness at all. The one-armed king behind me laughed. "There's not much left." The bound zombie queen kneeled on the ground and could only listen to her opponent's words. The one-armed king sees this and once again launches a verbal attack. Includes nutrients needed by Dot and flesh to be returned. Everything was ready, now it was time to be compensated, just when the one-armed king thought he would get his wish. A razor-sharp blade strikes, with lightning speed. As the two monsters look on in amazement, they see the tentacles binding Zombie Queen being severed. Then a hand suddenly appears and pulls her backwards. Sheila grabs Zombie Queen with one hand and holds a knife in the other, and in the next moment she's in front of the one-armed king. This scene instantly made Zombie Queen feel incredulous. She then rolls directly behind her with a cold grunt. Sheila joins the fight, already gritting her teeth as she greets the one-armed king. But he says with disdain, "Obstructionist, I didn't realize you had such great fighting skills." Sheila's eyes flashed with a cold light when she heard this. The tentacles are fast, but not so fast as to be unbearable. And then Sheila has chopped her opponent's tentacle into several pieces. But the next moment she looked at the one-armed king in front of her in horror, because the other party was still laughing with the same disdainful look. However, Sheila was feeling a little worse for wear, as the one-armed king's voice said, "This is the end of the line." The sharp blade in Sheila's hand fell to the ground. By now, her abdomen has been pierced by the one-armed king's tentacles, and the other taunts her with the idea that if she stays alive, she'll survive. The bound bear sees this and yells at her helplessly. Even Zombie Queen, who's never been happy with her opponent, stands up and worries about Sheila. But the one-armed king said to her on all fours, "Your behavior is still ignorant. You're not their family. Why did you step in? I know you're close to this kid, but your obsession seems to be a bit much, doesn't it?" And by now Sheila is hunched over and shaking. The one-armed king laughed and used the child's safety as an excuse to continue to blackmail her. But now Sheila is coughing up blood and gasping for air. The one-armed king said, "Don't be sad. The more the world is like this, the more we need to support our lives to have hope." The one-armed king points his finger at Sheila and says, "Even if it's a family game." After hearing this, Sheila thought to herself, "Yes, I am a monster who is nothing and only knows how to smash things. Even if I die like that, there's nothing to be sorry about." Thinking about it, she recalled the first time she met Jufu. At that time, she was so innocent and cute that she used to laugh in front of herself. It was through her that she gained hope. Even if we're not related by blood, I will guard my only hope, and I will not allow you to mock such sentiments. After saying this, Sheila grips her opponent's tentacles with both hands and clenches them hard. She pulls out the sharp tentacle that runs through her abdomen. But the one-armed king said, "It seems you don't react well." Then he took out the same spikes as Zombie Queen and asked her, "Would you like to try it out?" But at this point, Sheila doesn't have time to pay attention to him, and is still desperately trying to pull out. Just as the tentacles are about to pierce her body again, suddenly a trail of blood flies between the two in an instant. The one-armed king immediately looked at the scene in front of him with horror in his eyes, because blood was spewing from his mouth. How could this incredible change have happened? Could it be that the effects of the healing drugs are working? He remembers when he looks down and sees the syringe sticking out of his chest. Turns out Sheila stuck it in when she attacked him. I never expected that she would be willing to sacrifice herself for a little kid. Sheila grins as she sees the plan succeed. "I'm ignorant, but I'm well prepared. You get a lot of credit, thanks to the fact that you've been talking to yourself all by yourself. I have to thank you for this rare opportunity." Upon hearing this, the one-armed king instantly growled loudly in anger. However, the blood in his mouth is still spewing out wildly. Seeing this, he thought to himself, "No, his body is gradually experiencing a rejection reaction. He can't hold out any longer. He must have a hostage. My hair looks like it's going to explode. You need to get out of this body." Without much time to think, he immediately throws Jufu in front of Sheila's face. Then the one-armed king slowly recovered. Coincidentally, the sky suddenly started to rain. Fearing that I would get wet, Sheila wrapped me in her arms and whispered, "Next time, don't accept anything from anyone. Don't you dare open your eyes and see how worried I was about you. Luckily you're fine." At this time, the couple also screamed and ran over. When they arrive, Cubby holds up Sheila, who is badly injured, and asks, "Does your stomach hurt? Is it serious? Why do you have to do that? You almost died, you know?" Helpless, she had to reply in a low voice, "Is there any other way? I had to do it because I had no other choice, so stop yelling." And aside, Zombie Queen looks at her daughter's fingers and thinks, "The finger has been restored. Jufu will no longer be haunted by that monster. You are so incompetent that you can't even protect your daughter." She then hugged her daughter tightly and cried, "I'm a terrible mother. The one-armed king was whispering to himself at this point. What a waste of time. Almost had it. You're going to pay for this. Then he stood up and roared, I want it all back. At that moment, Ha Chunpei's cold grunt suddenly sounded in the shadows. And then the shells rained down on the one-armed king. Unaware of the situation, he shouted with a question mark on his face, What is this? Ha Chunpei below, holding a heavy weapon, laughs, Need you ask? This is that drug. I've been waiting for this day, brat, do you still remember us? Upon hearing this, the one-armed king growls loudly in anger, I'm not interested in knowing who you are. Ha Chunpei grinned at this, good answer. With that, he raised his gun and fired wildly at his opponent. The one-armed king, who couldn't stand it any longer, was furious. He quickly extends his powerful tentacles towards Ha Chunpei. But before he can touch his opponent, a grenade suddenly flies at his feet. Yujin looks at him and yells, I have a treasure for you. The one-armed king heard this and shouted, Bugs, I won't let you go. In the next second, with an earth-shattering explosion, its tentacles suddenly splattered in all directions. Seeing that the danger was over, Little Bear hugged Sheila and his daughter and said to his wife, I will take you to the doctor now. But then he looked at his wife with a puzzled look on his face. Because not only did she not answer, but she fell to her knees in a daze. The bear yelled again, What are you waiting for? At the sound of his voice, Zombie Queen turned her head towards Bear in confusion. After realizing that the other party was reacting, he said, I'll take the two of them over first, you protect this place. Upon hearing this, Zombie Queen immediately looked up and asked what was going on. But Sheila, who was seriously injured, whispered, Come closer, I have something to tell you, come here quickly, I can't bear it anymore. Zombie Queen felt a little confused when she heard that. She didn't know what the other party wanted. She didn't think much of it, but as she crawled towards her opponent, she wondered, what the hell is she up to? Why doesn't she just go get treatment? And then she closes her eyes tightly. But Sheila suddenly punches her hard in the face. Cubby, who was nearby, saw this scene and his jaw dropped. Zombie Queen, who had been attacked, looked down and froze in place. Then she covered her face and snarled at Sheila, You're dead today. Before the words left her mouth, Sheila grabbed her by the hair. Sheila then pulls her in front of him and curses, Get your head out of your ass, you idiot. Don't blame yourself for not saving your daughter, there's no time for that now. Do you hear me? You don't have to go through all this on your own. That kind of regret and remorse doesn't do anything for what's happened. And this isn't the time to be imagining things, you know, Sheila said as she coughed up blood from her mouth again. Seeing this, Zombie Queen instantly said with tears in her eyes, Stop talking, you're hurt bad, you need to see a doctor now. But in her heart she thought, I know it's useless to blame myself. She risked her life to save Jufu. As a mother, I just want to protect Jufu. At this point, the dying Sheila whispers to Zombie Queen once more, Now you must give up the idea of blaming yourself. I know you've been on your best behavior now, so think about what you should be doing now. She then stares in the direction of Sheila's finger with a puzzled look on her face, only to see a violin-like parcel sitting on the ground not far away. The one-armed king once again opened his eyes and looked at the scene in front of him. Then he stood up and roared with his body covered in wounds and blood. The father and daughter Ha Chunpei below immediately turned to look. Zombie Queen came at him fast with her golden eyes. Then she landed steadily not far from the one-armed king. And then she whispered, That's what I'm supposed to do. I don't need you to tell me. Therefore, as a mother, I must shoulder my responsibilities. At this point, Bear has taken the badly injured Sheila to the doctor's. And the doctor takes one look at her and says she's hurt so bad, she can barely move. Bear on the other side of the room is worried and asks, Will she be okay after the surgery? Rongjuan told them to take Sheila to the hospital first and leave her here. Hearing this, Bear thinks to himself, We have to keep her alive. So he rushed the doctor to lead the way. He carries Sheila to the hospital. Meanwhile, Zombie Queen and One-Armed King are fighting to the death. Down below, Yujin is covering her with machine gun fire. The bullets are splattering the One-Armed King's body with blood, but it's not doing him any good. Hearing the gunshot, he quickly swung his tentacles toward Yujin to attack. However, the next moment he is surprised by what he sees. Ha Chunpei is lying on the ground laughing and aiming his gun at him. He's unable to dodge, and he's hit hard in the head. Ha Chunpei is ready to laugh when his plan succeeds. Zombie Queen suddenly shouts. Yujin shouts at the same time for his father to get out of that dangerous place. But when he heard the voice, it was too late for him to escape. In the next instant, the weapon in his hand flew into the air. His entire body falls backward with the blood. A closer look reveals a deep gash in his chest. The insignia that was attached to his shirt was also cut off. Ha Chunpei's eyes were glued to the medallion as he remembered the past. At that time, he was looking at the badge in his hand, with his beloved daughter lying next to him. This tiny thing was a gift from his son. He said when his son was little that the army badge was a symbol of honor, so he made his father a clothing symbol. But he took one look at it and said, "It's ugly." But it was a gift from his son, so he accepted it with reluctance. All this time he didn't seem to care about the other side, but in reality, he treasured the gift his son gave him and wore it on his shirt every day. It didn't last long, and that day something really happened to his son. Looking at his brother, who had lost an arm and a leg, and was dead on the ground with his eyes open, Yujin was crying so hard, she couldn't believe that the mighty man had died like that. Ha Chunpei, on the other hand, didn't shed a single tear. He just picked up his son who was lying on the ground and whispered, "How dare you try to protect others with this kind of behavior? It's sad and stupid that you don't even know your own caliber." But Yujin, on the other hand, told his father to shut up. But she realizes that he's not listening to her and he's still cursing. She was so angry that she shouted, "You're a disrespectful father." But the next moment she looked at the scene in front of her with a question mark on her face. He was crying with bloodshot eyes and tears in his eyes. "Silly son, I'm sorry, I failed to protect you." At that time, Ha Chunpei vowed to avenge his son's death. When he saw the badge on the ground, he burst into tears. Then he gritted his teeth and thought, "I must have my revenge today." Then he used his hands to push his injured body up from the ground. Then he staggers up with his hands on his knees, chanting, "I will have my revenge." At the time he lost his son, he vowed to rid the world of those damn cannibals. The family's regrets will surely help them fulfill. With no time to think, he shouted with a fierce look on his face. But when he saw the one-armed king's tentacles, he froze in his tracks. Yujin yells at his father to get out of the way. But the tall, one-armed king lets out a laugh that reaches the heavens. Unbeknownst to him, Bear had come alongside him and kicked his injured calf off. Just when his tentacles were about to touch Ha Chunpei, who was frozen in place, the pain coming from his calf had to make the one-armed king bend at the waist. Suddenly, a voice came out that stunned the one-armed king. Bear waving his fist and saying, "You are weaker than I thought," then he rushed towards him. But the one-armed king said with disdain, "Such damage will not work on me." But in the next second, he hit his head directly and blew it out. Even his eyeballs and hard teeth were knocked out. In fact, Bear used all his strength to punch him. Yujin, who saw that the one-armed king was seriously injured, was very happy. "Brother and everyone, have you seen it? Bear helped everyone beat that guy up. Wait for me, I'll avenge you all." Thinking of this, she immediately raised the machine gun in her hand and aimed at the monster. She then quickly fires at him to cover Bear in the middle of the battle. Even the mighty Bear is having a hard time. This monster is really tough. But I'm pretty sure he's vulnerable now. Bear keeps motivating himself. He then rips off his opponent's tough tentacles and yells, "Keep struggling, monster, and I'll strip you of your skin." Suddenly, accompanied by 3 sharp tentacles flying from the shadows, Zombie Queen, holding an axe in both hands, comes up behind him and cuts him in the back of the neck before the one-armed king can react. This guy is getting worse and worse. Now's my chance, I have to kill him here today. Thinking of this, her face instantly became grave. A side bear also shouted, "I will make you regret, you bastard." The constant strong attacks forced the one-armed king to split his body into 2 bodies to fight back. Zombie Queen is waiting for her body to appear behind her, and the couple attacks the one-armed king. But below them, Ha Chunpei and his daughter are watching the scene in front of them with grave concern. The monster's eyes are still terrifying because of the heavy blow. And he's still disdainfully stating, "You guys are really wasting your efforts, you know you're just lowly bugs." Ha Chunpei, a seasoned combatant, sees the situation and yells, "You guys, back off and don't fight him." The one-armed king's eyeballs have turned black and bloodshot. But the husband and wife fighting with him were puzzled when they heard Ha Chunpei's cry. Yujin, unaware of the situation, is still trying his best to shoot the one-armed king. But the next moment she stares in disbelief at the scene in front of her eyes. But in the nick of time, her father caught her in his arms, but unfortunately, both were bound by the monster's tentacles. On the other side of the room, Bear is also tied up by the one-armed king. Even when he can't breathe, he tells his wife he's fine. And Ha Chunpei and his daughter are also tied up in a very difficult position. The one-armed king suddenly yells, "Let me out of here now, or I'll kill everyone." Zombie Queen heard this but said coldly, "Are you so bold with a hostage?" Then he waved the axe in his hand and pointed it at the other party and yelled, "You absolutely can't leave here. I'm much faster than you, so no amount of struggling is going to make a difference." As the two monsters looked at each other, a voice suddenly came to mind. Ha Chunpei and his daughter, who were supposed to be dying, woke up at the sound of the cry and looked around in confusion. The wrapped bear also looks around and thinks, it's coming from the building. The one-armed king suddenly said to Zombie Queen, "Do you realize that now? All of you in this village are members of my family. The leftover scraps inside become part of me. If you really want to save your daughter, do as I say." Meanwhile, on the other side, the controlled villagers are heading towards the crowd hiding in the shadows. Rongjuan sees the terror of the villagers and swings a pipe in front of the children. Behind me, I was whispering my father's name in my sleep. But the villagers were already slobbering and pouncing. A terrified Rongjuan sweats coldly and thinks, "Wake up, I have to protect the children." At this point, I suddenly woke up and walked towards the crowd. A terrified Rongjuan desperately cries out, "Jufu, don't go over there, it's dangerous." But not only did I not listen to her, I looked up and opened my eyes towards them, with my eyes glowing gold. The one-armed king outside seems to feel something bad, his eyes staring dead ahead. With that, he shouted, "What the hell is going on? Is the hostage connection broken?" At this point, not only are the villagers not attacking us, but I'm patting them on the back as they vomit. The one-armed king is angry and confused when he realizes the truth. Zombie Queen takes advantage of the situation and cleaves her opponent in half with an axe. The tentacles on Bear's body slowly release. The father and daughter next to him are also untied at the same time. Just as Zombie Queen is about to deliver the death blow to the one-armed king, the opponent runs and yells, "That's not yours, you own is my flesh and part of me. If it wasn't yours this wouldn't have happened." He finished speaking but looked at the Zombie Queen in front of him in horror. "Now you're starting to blame someone else?" In the next second, a tall shadow instantly enveloped him. Then he heard Zombie Queen exasperatedly say, "You really are a piece of trash that shouldn't exist." Zombie Queen then stares at the monster sitting on the ground. And not to be outdone, the one-armed king locked eyes with her and said, "How dare you stare at me with unpleasant eyes?" He then swings his sharp tentacles and quickly rushes towards Zombie Queen. But before he can even touch his opponent, his head is cleaved by an axe. Zombie Queen's eyes suddenly glowed golden and exerted her strength. In the next moment, the one-armed king's head was severed. After I woke up, I slowly walked outside. When the light hits my face, it's like a dream. Yujin looks at himself in the water and says to his father, "It's a shame, I've always wanted to catch him but we can't do anything about it." Then he looked at the one-armed king's head and said, "But I am still very happy in my heart. Maybe my dead brother and his family should also be very satisfied." And the father beside him, holding his badge, replied, "Yes, it's all over now." Meanwhile, our family of three was hugging each other tightly and crying. But I didn't shed a single tear. I just snuggled up in my parents' arms and didn't say a word. To everyone's surprise, the one-armed king has quietly crawled towards the darkness. A few days later, we were back to our old lives. The crowd recovered from their injuries and immediately played games with me, and my father was as happy as a child. Mother and Yujin turned into fans and looked at him with envy. Then his father pointed his finger ahead and laughed, "Jufu, are you hiding yet?" But I hid under the purple quilt and stammered, "I'm done." The air seemed to freeze for a moment, and the people were dumbfounded. I had been like this for a few days, and they were all very worried about me. Just when the three of them didn't know what to do, Ha Chunpei on the side suddenly exclaimed, "The infectious diseases are all coming out." Beside him, Bear retorted, "We'll take care of it, you don't?" And Yujin said, "That's right, father, you need to rest now." But the next moment Bear thinks of the past and smiles at him. But in his heart he thinks, "I can't let him keep on nagging me." Yujin also thought of his father nagging at this place, because he thought that saying everything he wanted to say was convincing others. At this point the door to the room behind him is suddenly thrown open violently. Only Rongjuan smiles and says to the crowd, "Oh my god, is Jufu still like that? I have something to say to her. May I ask you all to leave for a moment?" After a few people left, Rongjuan just smiled and looked at me without saying anything. And wrapped up in the covers, I thought to myself, why isn't she saying anything? It's making me uneasy. But the next second she suddenly patted me on the head and laughed. "You don't have to feel bad, Jufu. Thank you for saving me then." I looked up at her with a blank look on my face. But she said to me with the same smile on her face, "Thanks to you, we've cut our losses." In that moment Jufu saved all the infected. And she was fine except for her legs being a bit uncomfortable. Then she proceeded to say to Jufu, "Go play with her later if you have the time." Hearing her words, I said in embarrassment, "I did such a bad thing. Everyone died because of me. Didn't everyone else go out because they were afraid of me? It's all because of the trouble Jufu caused." Speaking of which, she suddenly remembered what her mother had said to her in her head when she was possessed. "You're scared, aren't you? Because you'll be a burden to your mother. I'm going to be very clear with you. You're really going to get me in trouble." I cried out in pain when I thought of this. I'm a monster who hurts everyone. But when Rongjuan heard this, he rubbed his hand on my head and said, "I'm glad that you can think like this. You know what? Real monsters are selfish, people who don't think about others. But you're not that kind of monster. You're more considerate and kind than anyone else, and you're also very cute. Thank you for saving me and Ingshi, and even saving all the villagers yourself, so you're not a monster. You are a great hero who saved the village." Then Rongjuan's voice became choked with tears. I couldn't control the tears that fell down my face when I heard what she said. I got out of the blanket and hugged her. Seeing me like this, she said, "You can cry all you want, it's been hard, Jufu." Hearing this, I sobbed and wiped my tears and nodded my head. It wasn't long before both of us were crying so hard that our eyes were swollen. But Rongjuan said happily, "I haven't cried like this in I don't know how long. It feels very painful." When I heard this, I said, "I want to be a strong adult, so don't cry. I want to protect my family, okay?" Rongjuan replied happily, "I'm sure you can do it." Encouraged by her, I beamed and made up my mind. And our actions and words were all visible to the family outside the door. Yujin even cried and said, "Jufu's mind is exactly like his appearance." Just as they were talking, a voice suddenly came from behind them. The crowd was startled by the sudden sound and turned to look at it. The doctor with the lollipop in his hand said, "So you're all here. Come to the hospital if you have time. I have something important to say." Rongjuan and I had already finished our conversation and came out. As we walked, I thanked her for comforting me, and she laughed and said, "We're family, so it's okay." But I said, "I am not your daughter." But then she said, "We don't have to be blood related to be family. Anyone can be family if they want to be, don't you think so?" At those words, I was at a loss for words as I looked at her, who was both familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. Meanwhile, the other side of the room had followed the doctor to the hospital, and they asked him if he could say it again. But the doctor said seriously, "I'll tell you again, please leave the village as soon as possible, please." Bear on the side suddenly asked dissatisfiedly after hearing this, "Please explain to me clearly, why did you suddenly ask us to go out? Have we done something wrong?" But the other side said coldly, "You're all right." Bear was furious when he heard this. "Is there something that makes you sad then? Or is there something wrong?" Just as the doctor was about to plan to spill the beans, Bear suddenly laughs, "Maybe because of the snacks in the third drawer? Honestly, we can't fire him for this little thing, can we?" The doctor who heard this was at a bit of a loss for words, his lips twitching. But Ha Chunpei, who couldn't stand to watch, said coldly, "Forget it, I'm not in the mood for jokes. You better explain why you want us out of here." The doctor scratched his head at that, not knowing what to say. He can only say helplessly, "I know you must be wondering why. In 3 days everyone must leave this village. Think about it. This used to be the most evil village in cannibalism. We took their land and built a village. And now we're keeping the village orderly and safe." Ha Chunpei's face was filled with questions. The doctor then explains that this is where the problem lies. Although we were lucky enough to kill those powerful monsters, what followed was a particularly serious problem. This was the personing she caught, and she got information about they before he died. If something goes wrong with their father, then his minions will flock to him. And they're coming for you and not the village. The crowd that heard this didn't dare to say much, just looked back at the doctor. He can only say what he has to say, and it's probably safe to assume that the vengeance will include Jufu and her mother. And I've heard that Chunpei and Yujin have also been targeted by them since a long time ago, so there's absolutely no need for you to travel together. Bear, unable to listen, curses, "But that's too dangerous, and it's even more dangerous to be separated from each other." But the doctor said coldly, "You are the biggest risk to me. I thanked you for saving the village at first, but this time is different. I can't afford to sacrifice people who don't have anything to do with it anymore." Worried about his daughter, Bear rushes to ask his opponent, "What about Jufu and Sheila? I don't even know what kind of state they are in right now." The doctor on the sidelines, however, said, about them, I'll designate a place to meet and just try to examine them in a safe place. This is the part where I will do my best to help you. Now let's part ways here today. For the sake of all, please leave, please. Bear and Yuzhin's faces turned dark as they heard this. But the next moment the latter's words make the doctor wonder. Honestly, you're right, we're only going to cause trouble if we stay here. The doctor was about to say thank you, but she added, I know you are doing it for everyone, but you actually think that we who protect this village are in danger. Shouldn't you respect the consciousness of wanting to live? Then he clapped his hands and said with a smile, oh my God, your attitude has changed so much. You treat us as family when you need help. But to abandon us like this when danger comes, I never thought we'd be treated like this. Wasn't this the kind of thing you were supposed to do as the man in charge? Then she smiled sinisterly and said, I didn't expect you to be as cunning as a monster. The doctor was so angry that he bit the lollipop in his mouth. And Bear looks at Yuzhin grimly in front of him. The doctor spits out the candy bar in his mouth. Please don't blame Ingshi and the villagers. The crowd immediately turned their heads toward him in confusion at the words. Yuzhin frowns and asks the doctor why. He immediately explains, I know I'm being selfish, and it's okay for you to complain about me or ask for something else. Or beat me up, but even then I want to protect my family and Ingshi. For a moment the room was silent to the sound of a pin, when Bear suddenly made the bowing doctor look up. At that moment Zombie Queen wrote on Bear's palm, we are also responsible, as he said earlier, let's set a date and place to meet for the meeting. Just one request we would like to make, and that is to ask you to definitely help us diagnose Jufu and Sheila. The doctor hesitates, not knowing whether to agree or not. Zombie Queen then said, if you ignore or run away I won't let you go. The doctor said, how can that be? Do you think I'm just that kind of person? Ha Chunpei, who heard this, said disdainfully, then I'll take the rest of the snacks as a requirement. Zombie Queen, who was worried about her daughter's hunger, was filled with joy. But the doctor on the other side of the room said, I have a gift for you before I leave. Would you like to see it? And then he led them to a laboratory. Meanwhile, there are 2 mice in a cage. And on the table is the blood for the experiment. Then the doctor said to the crowd, Jufu is the only one with an immune system, and using her immune body can create something closer to a vaccine. But one possibility comes to mind. What if Jufu's immune body was combined with her mother's blood? At that time, we injected this mouse with Jufu's blood, and at first it mutated very badly, but as it was injected with the conjugated blood the mutation was much reduced. Seeing the rat's mutation, Zombie Queen thought to herself, this is outrageous. How could this have happened? Then the doctor said, I have been experimenting for 2 weeks, and there are no problems with contact and mating. I have even developed resistance to the monster's toxins. Zombie Queen suddenly feels a little scary when she hears this. But the doctor said, this is a chance. Maybe you can return to being human again. Make a choice. Do you want to stay as you are, or do you want to receive the injection? Zombie Queen, who was on the sidelines, felt a bit hesitant when she heard this. The doctor thought for a moment and realized what she meant. Then Zombie Queen rolls up her sleeve and offers him her hand. The doctor is seen stabbing her with a syringe full of blood. Soon it's 3 days later in the morning. The villagers who are leaving are packing up their supplies. Zombie Queen is huddled in the trunk of a car. She thinks to herself, it's been days since the injection and it still hasn't worked. Has it failed? On the other side of the room, Bear smiles and tells his daughter to go greet the big guy. Rongjuan hears my thanks and says, I hope you are safe, but Ingshi on the other side bites her lip. She said, Jufu, you are very strong, but I still haven't. My mother, who was beside me, tried to say something to stop me, but she said out loud, Jufu, you're my only friend. This matter is decided by the adults, but this is all too sudden. Can you not leave? Anyway, your illness is cured. I looked at her and didn't know what to say. Ingshi didn't wait for me to answer and said, if we separate now, we don't know when we can see each other again. She then begged us not to leave with tears in her eyes and said, I'll treat you better. I'll play with you for the whole day, okay? There's really nothing we can do about it. As I watched her cry, I took her hand and smiled. Auntie Rongjuan said, even if we are separated, we are still family. The doctor on the other side of the room was speechless when he heard that, and Ingshi, who was too upset, took me in her arms. When I heard her cry, I couldn't control my tears. Perhaps to comfort me, Rongjuan behind me lowered himself and asked me what I wanted. Looking at her smile, I thought for a moment and told her what I wanted. Meanwhile, on the other side of the room, Zombie Queen was getting tired of waiting. Then she curls up in the car. But after hearing my request, the doctor refused without even thinking about it. Even when Rongjuan pleads with him, it's no use. If there's anything else you want, just say so. Before he can say anything else, Ha Chunpei suddenly puts a hand on his shoulder from behind. He said, "You'll listen to what we said on the condition that we leave, won't you?" The doctor, who had no choice, agreed. The father and daughter clapped their hands in joy at the success of their plan. I turned to Sheila happily as the doctor says yes. She smiled back at me and said, "Do whatever you want to do." I laughed especially hard after hearing that. With my request begins, Ha Chunpei runs desperately towards us. And as I ran ahead, I laughed, "Father, if you can't catch us, don't push yourself too hard." I thought to myself, I will be strong. People are losing their homes because of Jufu and can't even eat. Taking away space from others also causes a lot of damage. It's all because I'm not good enough. So that means I have to become very strong, so that I can be strong enough to protect my family. Sister Sheila, all muscle. My father, who is so strong and loves me so much. And my mother, who brought me into this world and raised me. That's why I have to be strong like them and fight to protect everyone. It wasn't long before we left the village in our car. And tired from all the fun, I soon fell into a quiet sleep, snuggled up against my father. Ingshi, who was still in the same place, asked her mother, "Jufu will be safe, won't she?" She happily states, "Of course she will. Her parents are so strong. Now I will build a nice village for us." But the doctor on the sidelines looks on coldly at the scene before him, then stood and stared down at the tall building that had been lived in for so long. Only when Rongjuan, who was ready to leave, told him to go did the doctor turn his head toward the mother and daughter with a puzzled look on his face. The next moment his cheeks suddenly blushed with shyness. Immediately after that, he said to them, "Okay, you guys go ahead. I'll be right behind you." But he was thinking secretly, that kind of expression is not suitable for appearing on your face. For the sake of our village, it will be hard, but it can't be helped. Then he looked at the blood in my hand and thought, I have to do this in order to protect Rongjuan's mother and daughter. The doctor, who had no time to think too much, followed the mother and daughter out of the village. And the one-armed king, who was thankfully alive, is limping through the ruins outside. But now he can't last long in this state. The once honorable man has ended up in this sorry state. As he walks away, he says, "If I walk away like this, I'll die soon. Now, if I want to live, I must be nourished." Then he cursed, "Damn it, I have to get my flesh back. I'm going to rip that woman to shreds along with all the bugs around her. And when everything is sorted out and I kill that guy, the real me will be back." But before he could finish his sentence, his entire body was chopped into several pieces. Eyes incredulously staring at the scene that appeared. He was still thinking in his head. There was obviously nothing there. There was no movement or odor, and it cut me off in an instant. Who the hell is it? At that moment a beautiful singing voice slowly came from the shadows. A man in a black mask appeared in front of him. The one-armed king's eyes were filled with fear as he seemed to know who he was. And the other guy was able to split his body into pieces with just a knife. But he looked scornfully at the head lying in a pool of blood. Then he spoke coldly, finally catching it. It didn't take long for him to carry the upper body of the one-armed king to a room. He was relieved to see the scene inside, because what he saw was the living room of an ordinary house. Is this place his base? The one-armed king below saw this and hurriedly asked his opponent, "What exactly is your purpose in bringing me here?" Before he could say anything, a voice suddenly came to mind next to him. "It's been a long time. I've missed you so much." A man in a suit appeared in front of him. He grinned at the sight of him and questioned him. "You've been out there so long, how well do you know the outside world?" Hearing this, the one-armed king immediately trembled in fear and wanted to speak again. The man, who didn't wait for an answer, propped his hand on his cheek and asked again, "If you don't want to talk about it, then I'll change the question. Did you find her?" But the one-armed king thought for a moment and still didn't know how to reply. Then the man who brought him here suddenly said, "Answer." The man in the seat said, "Forget it. We should give him some time to think." The one-armed king's shaking mind kept thinking of ways to get out of here. Then he realized he had a weapon against this guy. The distance was enough now, but not yet. Give him some information to let his guard down. Suddenly, he felt a chill come over him, and the next moment he realized he couldn't move his body. Immediately after that, he saw the man put down the cup of coffee that he had been drinking and said, after spending so much time to think of just that, "It's really disappointing. Do you still remember that day 2 years ago? I created this doppelganger of yours to let you go to her, but you've run off without seeing me until now, and you're even running around pretending you're me." The one-armed king took advantage of his opponent's speech to slowly crawl into his opponent's cup. At this time, the main body laughed and said, "Didn't you say that if you got stronger, you could be my equal? What a cute and whimsical idea." He then slowly lifted the cup that was sitting on the table. Seeing this, the one-armed king shouted, "Please wait, father. Please give me another chance, will you?" But the being licked his lips and said, "Enough already." At this time, he was so frightened that he cried and begged for mercy. "I will tell you all the information I know, so please give me another chance, okay?" And the main body was already coming at him with its bloody mouth open, with the one-armed king yelling, "No, I can't die." And with that he ended his life. In the next moment, a scene of Zombie Queen's family appeared in his mind. He had gathered more information than he thought he would. A scene of what happened to the one-armed king appeared in his mind immediately afterward. After reading it, he said with a satisfied expression, "That was fun." At that moment, the man on the other side of the room suddenly said, "Should I call our family to come over and take action?" But the man said, "No, there is no need to rush at the moment. For now, let's just enjoy some nice leisure time for a while, and let's wait for our families to come back before we prepare for the move." The man listened and replied seriously, "Yes, father." Immediately after that, the being put on his suit and straightened his tie. Then he grinned and thought, "That's funny. I'd like to meet that special kid." Meanwhile, back at home, I was sweating profusely as I watched the scene in front of me. Because the place where I slept was soaked with urine, I took off my wet pants and threw them on the side of the bed. Then I climbed onto my father's body and slowly fell asleep, thinking that what I had just seen was a dream. The next morning, my training continued as usual. And the first trainer of the day was Sheila, who loves me. But no matter how hard I hit her, she was able to dodge it with ease. I couldn't even touch the other person's fingers. I was so angry that veins popped out. Then I shouted in anger, "Give it to me now." As a result, the next second I was hit hard on the head by her. Then, holding a candy in her hand, she comforted me and said, "I told you so. Don't get excited, observe is the main thing. In order to get something you have to trick the other person or see through the other person's intentions. Don't forget the training." Before I could say, "Do it again," she said she was going out for a walk. She even asked Ha Chun-pei to practice with me first. When Yujin saw her getting ready to go out, he asked, "Where are you going to go now that it's time to eat?" Sheila just said coldly that she was going out for a cigarette. And Ha Chun-pei, who was training with me, was showing off candy in front of me. But I stood in front of him unconvinced, clenching my fists and thinking to myself, "Calm down and you will succeed." But Ha Chun-pei in front of me still looks like he doesn't care. I'm very angry with him. Without thinking, I threw my fists in the air and charged at him. He was still smiling at me when my palm touched his chest. I caught him off guard and hit him hard in the face. I take the candy out of his hand and dance around happily. Outside, Sheila is sitting in the stairwell with an unlit cigarette in her hand. She's got a frown on her face and she's thinking about something. Turns out the doctor told her she was badly injured by the one-armed king, fracturing her ribs in the process of penetrating her abdomen, causing injuries to the surrounding internal organs. Although surgery was performed, the bigger problem was the liver, as the damage was too great to be fully treated, and the aftermath would be severe. In fact, it's a miracle she's alive now. Hearing this, she asked in a cold sweat, "What are the after effects?" To reassure Sheila, the doctor had no choice but to say, "There will be severe fatigue, nausea, bloody stools and jaundice, and you can't be as aggressive as you were before." Sheila was already crying her heart out at the news. But in order not to worry those who cared about her, she pleaded with the doctor not to tell anyone. She clenched her fists in anger at this thought. Then she cried out, "Damn it, it's just because of that tentacle. Every time it moves, it makes me very sick. I can't even protect myself in this state. Be strong and raise Jufu before it gets any worse. It's the only thing I can do for her right now." Suddenly she glanced to the side with a question mark on her face. Zombie Queen quickly approached her with a notebook in her hand. Then she sat down next to Sheila and handed her the notebook. Zombie Queen, who can't speak, turns red in the face. Seeing the other party's appearance, Sheila had no choice but to take the notebook. Her brain was so messed up that she chanted, "What did you bring me to see?" But what it says leaves her a little confused. Because it says "thank you" in big letters. And then the Zombie Queen said, "I don't like you because you just showed up out of nowhere and said you were going to protect my daughter. Also said that my husband and I looked cheeky and stubborn for entering the tournament, so I hate you for that. But at least I also know that you'll do anything to protect my daughter, and as much as I don't want to admit it, once I saw you like that, my heart felt grateful. I'm not going to ask you what your intentions are, or maybe it's because I know how Zhufu feels. Followed by, thank you for protecting my daughter. And you were the one who brought me to my senses in the worst of times, so we should cooperate with each other to protect the ones we should protect. After listening to the other person's heartfelt words, Sheila said to him, it's speechless, you'd better care more about your children if you have time to write this. I'm very busy, don't you know? The zombie queen on the side was about to curse, but Sheila stopped her. It's only natural to work together for the same purpose, but zombie queen buries her head in her legs and thinks to herself, I was crazy to write that to her. Just as she's thinking furiously about whether or not to cooperate, Sheila beside her suddenly says to her, you know, Zhufu should learn how to protect herself by now. Because we don't know how long we'll be able to protect her, and she knows that, so she's really trying to work out. She doesn't want to be the one who is guarded, she wants to be the one who guards. So it's not just me who has to teach Zhufu before the crisis comes again, it's we. With that, she extended her left hand towards Zombie Queen. Zombie Queen was in disbelief as she listened to the other woman's story. Then she held out her hand with a puzzled look on her face. In the next second, both sides shake hands and agree to a deal. Sheila then speaks up. This is not the time for us to be arguing. Zombie Queen chimed in and said, the more you are in a situation like this, the more you have to help each other, because we all believe in each other. But then Sheila sighed. My daughter, I don't want Zhufu to become like her. After a few moments, Zombie Queen gets up and slowly walks towards the stairs. But as she reaches the door, she feels a sudden wave of pain. In the next moment, blood was seen coming out of the corner of her mouth. Soon Zombie Queen is alone on the roof. Then she slowly reached up to where the sun was shining. In the next moment, 2 fingers began to petrify. Looking at the mutated hand, she thought uneasily, it really didn't work. I thought there was a slight change. Unexpectedly, it was just a pain in the gums, nothing different. Then she fell to her knees and cried out, Doctor, your guess was wrong. Could it be that my constitution is not good enough to cause no reaction after all this time? At this point, Bear pushes the door and yells, Mother Zhufu, are you on the roof? But after a couple of steps, he turned his head and saw something that surprised him. Because at that moment, Zombie Queen was huddled in the corner, not talking. Bear sees his wife like this and rushes forward to ask, what happened? Why are you crying so hard? Bear, who wanted to reassure her husband, had to explain the truth. After hearing this, Bear then stroked his wife's head and comforted her, saying, it hasn't worked yet, so no wonder you're so sad. Zombie Queen shed tears and said, I was looking forward to it. Although I also know that this may not work, I still want to change back to a human so that I can spend time with you and my daughter. But Bear laughed and said, then you can cry all you want. Zombie Queen heard this and shouted at the sky, I want to be human again. Bear thought for a moment and then smiled and said, do you remember the old days when Zhufu was a kid and we used to joke around a lot? This is how it would be if the gender of each other changed. Even if I'm a woman, because of my size I'd still rely on you. There's also the Zhufu as an older child thread, right, and that's a real headache too. But Zombie Queen says, 40 minutes of agonizing over formula and diapers. But the sincere expression made Bear say, you're really cute. What would you like to do if you could turn back into a human? Zombie Queen suddenly stops talking, and after a moment's thought, shyly says, I remember it very well now too. Though it's not a big deal to others to go back to being human. I'd like to walk with my family during the day, so that I can have fun at the playground, and what I'd like to do most is brighten up the house. Hearing this, Bear covers his wife's hand and says, is that true? Trust the doctor even if it doesn't seem to be working right now. And if it does materialize, do all the things you're talking about. Upon hearing her husband's warm words, Zombie Queen was suddenly too shy for her own good. Just as Bear was stroking his wife's head in a good-natured, comforting manner, a voice that resonates through the heavens. Immediately afterward, I pushed out the door and yelled, where are you, mother? You said you were going to read a fairy tale book to Zhufu. Bear is relieved to see it's his daughter, and says to his parents, I've got a quilt ready. Bear got up and hugged his daughter and said, calm down, I'm going to take you in now and tell you a story. Behind her, Zombie Queen looked at the father and daughter grinning as she thought, well, just wait. Like Bear said, it's a lot better than not being able to do anything at all, isn't it? After overcoming a lot of suffering, she finally found peace. Looking at the father and daughter who were having fun, she became more convinced that even if I can't turn back into a human, I still have a family, so there's no need for me to rush. At this point Bear grinned at her and said, "Mother Jufu, now get in there." Zombie Queen, however, whispered, "Okay," but for some reason my body is suddenly so heavy. But I was stunned by the scene in front of me. Bear was also looking at his wife in disbelief. Because she's bleeding out of her 7 orifices. And before they knew it, she fell to the ground. After a few moments, I heard voices coming into my head, but after a few moments, it suddenly became very quiet and I couldn't see a thing. But she was thinking, "Isn't this too much? I don't want anything more than to be ordinary. Is that a shame?" Then she threw her head up to the sky and shouted, "I'm ordinary, too," followed by hugging her head and crying, "I just wanted to be a human being." I don't know how long it took, but I woke up from my dream in a state of shock, because the place where my mother had been sleeping was not only covered in blood. I found her sharp fangs that had fallen out. The crowd rushes out to look for her. Yujin and Ha Chunpei, on the other hand, have gone from the upper floors to the first floor. Even Sheila, who is not happy with Zombie Queen, is going around looking for her. And my father and I climbed the stairs to the roof to check it out. When we got to the top, we were amazed at what we saw. Because the mother, who was covered in blood, was standing in front of us. She seems to recognize us and she turns her head slowly. And then she stammers, "Jufu, Bear, good morning." My father and I didn't expect her to actually turn back to normal, so we immediately ran towards her. Then our family hugged each other tightly. This is the end of season 1. Thank you for watching.